Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Solidarity with Kshama Sawant telethon. We have a great lineup. Thank you for coming in. Kshama Sawant, the only socialist on the Seattle City Council, is facing a right-wing recall right now. This is an attack on the right to protest. They're attacking her for her involvement in the Black Lives Matter protests, her participation in that movement, attacking her for her support and leadership in winning the Amazon tax in Seattle for affordable housing. This recall is an attack not only on Kshama, but on all of us. And that's why you all are here today. Thank you so much for coming. When you look at what's going on in Seattle right now, this is reflective of the attack across the country on progressive movements, across the world, actually, on protest movements that are going on right now. You look specifically in Seattle, what's going on with this recall? This recall is a who's who of wealthy and right-wing donors who have opposed every progressive movement, every progressive victory in Seattle, from the $15 minimum wage to the Amazon tax to the first in the nation winter evictions ban, the first in the nation ban on the police use of chemical weapons. This recall is being supported by dozens of wealthy Republicans, multiple billionaire families, and they're now also getting the support of the right-wing Seattle Police Union, SPOG. Together, these forces have raised almost $500,000 to try to remove the most effective fighter in City Hall in Seattle, someone who has been a real beacon for the socialist movement nationally. So thank you again for everyone who's coming onto this stream on YouTube, on Facebook, inviting your friends. Really love seeing everyone here and being a part of this and being able to be here with a great host of panelists. My name's Matt Smith. I'm an activist with the Kshama Solidarity Campaign here in Seattle, and I'm here with a number of great guests: Laura Steiner, Katie Halper, Byron Sigcho-Lopez. We're going to get through a list of panels that's going to be spanning the night as we talk about some of the critical issues that are facing our movement, and also critically raise funds as a movement for Kshama to defend her against this right-wing attack. So as we're going through these panelists, I want everyone to think about what can you give? What can you give to this movement? What can you give to help defend Councilmember Sawant against this attack? As well as everyone should be listening to these panelists. They have a lot of great insight for how we've won these victories, how we've built these movements. And I want to give it over now to start off the night with our first panel, which is going to be hosted by Katie Halper. Katie is an activist and a political comedian, a political commentator. She's going to be leading up this first panel. So Katie, let's give it over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for watching and for coming to this. And thanks so much for everyone else participating. And also thank you so much, Kshama, for doing what you do. And just, should we just start with the first panel? And you've heard the asks, right, about the donations. But very excited to be bringing on that first panel. And one second, please. I want to make sure I have my the right one ahead of me. Apologies for the delay. This is a great time to consider donating, by the way, or to actually go and donate. I have the incorrect document in front of me. One second. Okay. Okay, very excited. All right, I'm back. Sorry, everyone, I'm sick. This is all a metaphor for like the late capitalism or something like that. Okay, so very excited to be joined by Kshama Sawant, obviously, Emily MacArthur, who is a Kshama Solidarity Campaign Manager, Reverend Jeffrey, who's a pastor of Seattle's New Hope Baptist Church, and John Nichols, the great John Nichols, from the nation. And just wanted to open it up, I guess, starting off with a question for Kshama. It seems like you had just defeated the efforts of Amazon and Jeff Bezos to buy your city council seat with massive corporate cash. And that was less than 2 years ago. And there are 4-year terms in Seattle, I believe. So what is this recall campaign against you, and who is behind it?
Thank you, Katie, for that question. And I wanted to thank all the panelists who are here today for this telethon. It's extremely important that we build this kind of nationwide solidarity against this recall campaign. And I think, Katie, as you highlighted correctly, we just won our re-election, our second re-election, and overall our third election in November 2019. And we won that election. The working class of Seattle won that election despite everything and the kitchen sink thrown at us from big business, from the Chamber of Commerce, from Amazon and Jeff Bezos themselves, throwing $1 million money bomb in the last weeks of the election. And despite the opposition from so-called progressive Democrats on the city council, Latina council members who ran their own candidate against us in the primary election in 2019, saying that, oh, we agree with Sawant's policies, she just doesn't know how to build relationships, and here's a candidate who will build good relationships. Basically throwing good old civility politics against us. But the working class of Seattle fought back, and we won the election. And the recall campaign was launched against us less than a year after our election victory. In other words, this is an attack on the basic democratic rights of the voters of District 3 who decided that they wanted a working class elected representative. They wanted a continuation of the victories we have won. They do not want Amazon anointed candidate, big businesses, people in City Hall. And so because they failed at the actual election, now big business and the wealthy are launching this recall campaign against us. And the people who are behind the recall are a who's who of corporate real estate and big business and the millionaire and billionaire class of Seattle. The list is endless, actually. And in fact, just to give you one example, one of the donors to the recall campaign is the CEO of a company called Goodman Real Estate. Goodman Real Estate is a company worth billions of dollars in the United States and Canada, and they are the most evicting landlord in the city. And it's completely not a surprise that they have become part of this recall, because they are angry, they're livid at the fact that our office has won unparalleled victories for renters and for working people, and they want to take it back to their good old days of corporate dominated City Hall.
And I just wanted to ask some of the other people here on the Zoom, and I want to ask you, Reverend Jeffrey, Dr. Reverend Jeffrey, what is it about Kshama's campaign that you find important and relevant to the work that you're doing? Can you guys hear me?
I think Reverend Jeffrey's muted still.
Oh.
Since coming to the council, she has spoken to issues directly related to people of Seattle, the poor people, people who need housing, people who need jobs, people who need income, the 15% tax, the 15% minimum wage. She pushed that through. She supported Black Lives Matter. She's been a part of the housing. She's helping Blacks $100 million to block the $100 million from the police department, to cut funding from the police, who are really out of control in Seattle. I mean, she's done everything that that a person can do to help build power and strength. You know, if you don't mind, I can give you a little history about what goes on in Seattle. Some of you may not be familiar with the history of struggle in Seattle. In January 26, 1969, Edwin T. Pratt, who was the head of the Urban League, who was leading similar fights that Kshama is leading now against big business, for housing, for equity, was shot in the face at his home and killed, and the murderer was never found. In 2000 and I mean 1980 and 1996, 1995, when we were involved in this same kind of struggle. And I happened to be the person spearheading the struggle. My church was bombed. They call it an accident. But while it took me 2.5 years to get a building permit. But while we were building, another fire was set in the basement, burning tiles and sending black smoke through all of the ventilation systems, costing us over $200,000 to get it fixed. They were trying to keep us from rebuilding the church and reorganizing. This kind of thing goes on in Seattle. This is hidden from the rest of the country because, you know, people are not really paying attention. So that's why a lot of these massive billionaires and rich people feel safe here because they feel that they can do this stuff undercover. And now they're coming after Kshama. And this is because every time somebody raises up, every time a movement raises up, that seems to be gaining steam. Every time somebody addresses the issue of fair housing, of livable wages, all those things, police brutality, Black Lives Matter. I mean, she's on the front line of all these issues, and she's a target. And the thing about it, and I'm gonna finish when I say this, in the year 1969, right after they killed Edmund Pratt, the council later on that year instituted a document that he had been fighting against, calling all of the central area where most of the Black people live ignorant, uneducated, and they needed to be removed. He died, and they instituted this document. They moved Kshama, and there's nothing stopping them from continuing this thing that they have about enriching the rich and really just pushing the poor out. So yeah, I know why they're doing it. They've always done it.
Thank you so much. And John Nichols, wanted to know your thoughts. What do you think has people so afraid of Kshama? What is the significance of the recall, and what do you think it's about?
I think the most important thing is to unmute when you talk. We
won't be silenced, exactly. No more silencing, yeah.
I think the important thing to understand is that since she was elected in 2013, Kshama Sawant has been a national figure. And what she has done in Seattle is most important for her constituents. It's most important for the people who live in the city. But when she does it, it has a national and even international ramifications. And that's one of the reasons why I think that from the start of her tenure on the city council, she's been targeted for attacks. She's been targeted for big budget efforts to remove her. And I would invite folks to think back to when she was elected in 2013. It was 2 years before Bernie Sanders launched his campaign for the presidency. So as a result, you had this person out in Seattle, a proud socialist, elected to a city position. And strikingly, it got national attention. I remember being on MSNBC shows, and in fact, I think one with Kshama, and being on National Public Radio and all these places, because I'd written a book about socialism in the United States. And there were all these folks who were saying, well, this has never happened before. I mean, this is an unprecedented thing. This woman in Seattle, what's going on? Of course, it had happened before. The United States has a long democratic socialist tradition that goes back to Thomas Paine and throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. But it had been so erased, it had been so pushed off the mainstream discussion for so long that when Kshama Sawant was elected, suddenly everyone was interested, everyone was fascinated. That allowed her to, again, do the core essential work for her constituents in Seattle. But in doing that, to show what was possible on a $15 wage, on addressing police violence, on addressing international issues at the local level, on talking about manufacturing and unions and jobs and all of these issues in very different ways. And so because she has been such a a national figure and such an important figure on putting ideas into play, it comes as no surprise that there are very powerful people that would like to see her moved off that council. And it's interesting, I'll close with this, that this recall campaign has not gotten a lot of national attention. It hasn't been on, MSNBC or CBS or NBC or all over the New York Times. But I'll tell you this, if Kshama Sawant gets beaten, that'll be headlines everywhere. Everyone will be talking about, oh, wow, the socialists got beat in Seattle. I guess that period in our history is over. And so I would just remind people that as they think about this, we are talking about something that is most important to Seattle because the elected official is most connected to their constituents, but that has national and even international ramifications.
And of course, that would be a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If it's, oh, look, the socialists lost, but without looking at why there's such why there was such an effort behind the recall, right? If they report on it, it's going to be reported on as if, like, from nowhere.
Yeah, I think, look, here's exactly, it will be, much of the reporting would suggest, oh, well, people rose up and they got rid of this radical city council member. And I've written a lot of books about media, and that's how media often works. But the other thing to understand is that we're talking here about the most powerful people, not just in Seattle, but in the world. We're talking about Jeff Bezos. We're talking about billionaires who are definitional figures in our economic life at a time when there is a discussion about maybe we should tax billionaires. Maybe we should have different policies as regards the accumulation of massive amounts of wealth. Maybe we should have different policies about the incredible income gap and the wealth gap in this country. And that's why I think now we see all this as part of our discussion at the national level, but people forget that back in 2013, when Kshama Sawant was elected initially, this had people's jaws dropping. They were like, wow, what does this mean that a socialist has been elected in a big American city? And it did shake the discourse, not just in Seattle, but nationally. And there are plenty of people who would like to close that discourse down. Now, it would be very hard because other people have stepped up. Bernie Sanders ran 2 campaigns for the presidency. AOC and others served in Congress. And so, it's not like democratic socialism would be pushed away or shoved completely to the sidelines. But those who would like to suggest that this is some sort of utopian vision, that this is some sort of an impossible notion, would be thrilled to say, oh, well, the first one, the one who got elected out there in Seattle, I guess 7-8 years ago, that she's gone now. And so now we're ending this chapter. So that's, I think if we see this campaign and this recall in that perspective, it's important to understand what's at stake. It's a city election first and foremost. That's always the way to look at it. But this is a city election that people across the country and indeed around the world will look to for signals about what is possible, and not just what is possible for a progressive elected official to achieve, but also what is possible for power to do in shutting such an elected official down.
And thank you so much, John. And really quickly, before I ask the next guest a question, just want to remind you, because we do live in the capitalist world system. We don't like it, but we live in it. So here's what you can do to support this this campaign. You can donate. And as you know, Kshama does not take a penny in corporate cash, so it's really on us to support her. So you can give whatever you can. We'll be reading out the names of donors and thanking you as the night goes on. So you'll definitely want some of that special love and attention. Very validating. And also post on social media about this telethon and about the Solidarity campaign. And you can tag the campaign, which is at Kshama_SC. So that's at KSHAMA_SC. Emily wanted to bring it to you. You are Kshama's campaign manager, and wanted to know how you guys are fighting back. You're the campaign manager for the Kshama Solidarity campaign. So what are you guys doing to fight against this recall effort, and what can other people do to support it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do want to kind of echo a little bit of what folks have said of just how strong of an opponent we're facing. Not just, the billionaires, as has been said, but literally every wing of the political establishment is in agreement that they want to be rid of the socialists, right? They've got big business, the local corporate media, the courts, and also, of course, the Democratic Party establishment, colluding to silence and remove Kshama. And we have to get out in communities and actively counter not only the lies that they'll have presented as fact on the ballot. So that's going to be like how this recall is presented to working class people, is just as though these accusations are just established fact on the ballot. But then also on top of, just what will be sent out on the ballot, basically daily attacks against Kshama and our movement from big business, and also openly right-wing forces like Breitbart and the Patriot Journal, who've published articles endorsing the recall campaign, calling it a Republican-led movement. And these forces really want to push back on not just Kshama, but the largest movement in U.S. history that we saw last summer. Right? They want to criminalize protests to cut across the confidence of ordinary people to go out and hit the streets and demand justice, just like we saw with the mass support for Black Lives Matter. I think, as John said, right, a broader layer of young people and working people who are rejecting this idea that they have to sacrifice their dreams and their very lives on the altar of profit, right? There is a larger layer of people who are reaching those conclusions. And this campaign, this recall campaign, is an attempt to squash that. So we got to get out on the street corners, right? In front of grocery stores, community events, to approach people and talk to them, because this is, as much as it has these national and international implications, fundamentally like a block by block issue where we have to talk to people in District 3, having our literature on hand. Obviously, that whole operation, it costs money. And our opponents, the recall campaign, they're not worried about expenses. While they're out on the corner collecting recall signatures, they've got a slew of billionaires and corporate landlords that are bankrolling their efforts. They've already raised $500,000. They also have the Seattle Police Officers Guild, also known as SPOG, asking their members to go out and canvass for them. So those are the foot soldiers of the recall campaign, right? Is the Seattle Police Officers Guild. And I'll just note that SPOG was recently, during the Black Lives Matter uprising this past summer, they were expelled from the local labor council. And this was a real statement from teachers, from electricians, from carpenters to say, we have tried again and again to get accountability from the police department, and you have shown no remorse and no desire to move in a positive direction, and we can't be affiliated with that anymore. So this is, those are the foot soldiers of the recall campaign. I think also notably just this week, the Seattle Police Department, in a national ranking of police departments on the basis of respect for civil rights. So as of 500 police departments, where does Seattle fall? 487th, pretty damn near the bottom. And I would contrast that of billionaire backers and the police officers being their foot soldiers. For us, we've got hundreds of volunteers, ordinary people, students, teachers, baristas, and they've gotten over 5,000 small donations out on the streets and on the phones to fund our work. Whether that's a $15 donation for the Socialists who won 15, or $27 in solidarity with that connection to Bernie, right? People understand that it's working class dollars that make this campaign run. And from the leaflets to maintaining the website, and of course our dedicated staff, it really does add up to wage this battle against the weight of the whole entirety of the political establishment.
Let me unmute myself. Okay, so thank you, Emily. And as promised, we already have some donors, so I'm going to read those names. We got, who do we got? We have $27, and people probably know why that's significant, right? Because of the St. Bernard amount of money. He's my saint, but I'm being facetious because, of course, I don't have a Messiah complex. I just think he has great politics. So Enrique V gave $27. We got a $27 donation from Linda E, $15 from Mario V. Whoa, $250 for Daniel C, from Daniel C. So thank you guys. You see, this is already happening. People are already chipping in, people-powered movements. Where do we tell, how do people do this? How can people make these donations? I just want to make sure people know the easiest way to do that. So if someone can maybe put that in the chat, I can make sure to read that out. But people are somehow doing it. Again, testament to people-powered movements that they're figuring it out.
SocialitySolidarity.org/telethon.
Okay, guys, this is huge piece of information. I'm so excited. Ready? This is where the fundraiser really starts, right? Because I'm going to actually tell you where to go, which is really exciting. Major moment, historic moment. Yes, KshamaSolidarity.org/telethon. Again, that's KshamaSolidarity.org/telethon, which is KSHAMASOLIDARITY.org/telethon. I don't know why you might as well spell solidarity. Never hurt anyone. Yes, and again, thank you, Chris K, for the $27. Wow, this is great. We're already making moves, guys. This is very exciting. So yeah, I have more questions, of course. I always do, but I think we want to move it to the next. You tell me, guys. Again, people powered. We can do a consensus. Do you want me to move it to the next segment? Should I ask more questions now for the guests? Move on. We're moving on. Okay, so that's great. Well, I want to thank everyone. This is great. Feel like we barely scratched the surface, which is great because we have so much more to do now. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Katie, for coming on. Really fantastic. I know we have very limited time for each panel. We have a lot of people that are going to be speaking on a lot of these key issues that first panel hit on, kind of that surface level of everything that's going on with this recall, the national importance of this campaign, the national importance that Kshama and her council office and the movement here in Seattle has played across the country. And I just want to really emphasize that point that John made about that national importance, that when we won the $15 minimum wage here in Seattle, that spread across the country. When we won the Amazon tax here in Seattle, that has started to spread across the country. We're going to hear from some activists in Burbank who are trying to do something similar in Burbank, California, to what we did here in Seattle. And we're going to go to that panel. But I want to reemphasize, we've already raised, I think, almost $1,000 so far, just since we've been here for the last 30 minutes or so. I see Nick J put in another $100 to push us up. Now is the time to kick off those donations. KshamaSolidarity.org/telethon is the place to go to put in those donations. If you can give $15, if you can give $27, if you can give $100 like Nick, or $250 like Daniel, every single one of those donations helps to build this movement, helps to build this fight back against those right-wing forces here in Seattle, who, if they are successful, will, just like our victories have been successful and had resonance across the country, a defeat here in Seattle would also have impacts across the country. So put in those donations, and then I will kick it over to our next panel, which is hosted by Lauren Steiner. She is an activist and an organizer, the producer and host of the Robust Opposition on Facebook and YouTube. This panel is going to be talking about that critical victory of the Amazon tax and the affordable housing struggle, both here in Seattle and across the country. So Lauren, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, and I'm really pleased to be here. When I came up with the idea to do this telethon 2 months ago, it was because I read Jonathan Rosenblum's article in The Nation, and I was so infuriated that these right-wing billionaires were trying to kick out one of the best, most effective elected officials in our country. I just said, we have to do something. So I contacted the other co-hosts, and it took a little bit of time to get it off the ground, but here we are. And I'm talking about the tax Amazon victory, and also the victories for renters' rights and affordable housing. But I would be remiss if I did not point out that the background behind me is Gaza and the Iron Dome intercepting those ineffectual rockets that Hamas is lobbing over there. And as usual, in an asymmetrical warfare, it was just announced on Yahoo that Israel has accelerated their airstrikes, as if it was not already bad enough. And I noticed on Kshama's page that she's right, her Twitter page, she's right on it. She's going to be introducing a resolution. She's already being an activist to try to get people to call other council members to support the resolution. So before we get into the tax Amazon and renters' rights segment, Kshama, why don't you tell us briefly what your resolution is about?
Thank you so much for asking me about that, Lauren. In fact, I'm just now back from a protest rally in Seattle downtown organized by many activist organizations condemning this brutal violence and not only the ongoing policy of imperialism and apartheid by the Israeli state against the Palestinian people, but now this new escalation of violence, evictions, and the removal of Palestinian people from their own land, from their homes, from their farmland. And at that protest rally, I said that tomorrow in the city council meeting, I'm going to be bringing a statement, a public statement, demanding that Democratic President Biden stop this continuation of the US imperialist policy of aiding and abetting Israel in its apartheid program in that region, and demanding that that not only that the Biden condemn Netanyahu and the right-wing Israeli regime's policies, but also stop once and for all the military aid and weapons and arms sales to Israel, and take a real position against what is going on there. And tomorrow, what's going to be crucial is this is a public letter. I'm going to be publicly urging the Democrats on the city council to support this. And really, it's a question of how strongly we can build the momentum. So we need hundreds of people in Seattle and also nationally to sign up to speak in public comment. The online sign up opens at noon tomorrow, Seattle time. We need people to sign up and tell the city council members, we need you to sign on to the statement from my office, from Councilmember Sawant's office, because this is a moment of truth. It's a question of, as Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez said, this is not a moment for both sidism. It's not about, both sides are at fault. This is 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. No, it is absolutely true that the overwhelming responsibility for what has happened in the Israel-Palestine region lies at the doorstep, not only of the Netanyahu regime right now, but at the doorstep of the global system of capitalism and imperialism, which subjects such majorities of humanity to varying degrees of oppression. And literally right now, the Israeli regime has its boot on the neck of the Palestinian people. In a similar form, the US regime and the police and the criminal justice system apparatus has its knee on the neck of the Black community in the United States. So it really harkens back to the need for international solidarity among working class people. And I'm really proud as a member of the labor movement to see that many unions across the world are taking a public position against this violence by the Israeli regime, by the Israeli state, and demanding justice for the Palestinian people. And tomorrow, it's a question of holding the Democrats on the city council accountable.
So now to talk about the Amazon tax. So it is officially called the Jumpstart Seattle tax, and what it is, it's a payroll tax on the city's biggest businesses and highest earners, with a tiered system, with the highest tax being paid by companies with payrolls over $1 billion. So you can see why it's called the Amazon tax. Now, this was passed after the mayor, Jenny Durkin, to whom I might add, Amazon contributed $350,000, was able to reverse a much more modest tax that you had gotten on Amazon in 2018. This new tax is 4 times the amount. And on top of that, it passed during a pandemic and during historic racial justice protests. Kshama, how were you able to organize this campaign during this pandemic and in the midst of these protests? And how did that actually help you?
I think it's important to note that when we ran our re-election campaign, and indeed all our election campaigns, we have run on the major issues that affect the lives of ordinary working people. Hence we first ran on the $15 minimum wage, and less than 6 months after we took office in January 2014, we had won the $15. We had made Seattle the first major city to have won $15 an hour, and that 15 now movement went nationwide, and other cities like Minneapolis followed suit because of socialists fighting there as well. And the question of taxing big business to fund the basic needs of working people and marginalized communities has been a live one, especially given that Washington state has the nation's most regressive tax system. In other words, if you're wealthy, if you're well off, even you pay a small fraction, like 2% maybe of your personal income as taxes. There are virtually no taxes on big business. And if you are a working class or a poor person, you pay double digits of your income in taxation. So the support for taxing big business to fund affordable housing and Green New Deal projects, which was what our Amazon tax was tremendous. But what is important is that it's no coincidence that the Amazon tax victory was won by the Tax Amazon movement in the midst of the Black Lives Matter protests. And it was incredible the kind of support we got from Black and brown working class people and from the working class as a whole during the protest. It was the support was so powerful that we were able to collect 1,000 signatures a day to the ballot initiative petition that our movement had launched. And that was a very crucial tactic. I mean, Lauren, you asked, how did we win? This is how we won. Because the Tax Amazon movement was democratically organized, and Socialist Alternative and my organization and we insisted on rank and file democracy inside the movement, because you not only need to hold politicians accountable, you need to hold unelected movement leaders accountable, because we don't want a career-driven insider negotiation type of strategy that never helps working people. What we need is for rank and file working people and activists themselves to be empowered. And because we were able to win that kind of movement in the first place, we were able to win the victory as well, because it was not only empowered thousands of people who fought for it, but also because the movement together held democratic discussions and debates and voted on this ballot initiative tactic, which basically said that if the city council did not pass the Amazon tax as an ordinance, then we are going to go straight to the voters. And without that credible threat of 30,000 signatures on the ballot initiative, we would not have been able to force the city council, the Democrats on the city council, and big business to concede. And I'll just say this is a very common strategy of the ruling class. They will oppose working class movement to the bitter end, but when movements are able to shift the balance of power in such a way that we are able to win, then they will spin a narrative, a false narrative that, oh, they were going to do it anyway, they were going to tax big business anyway, and this happened not because of socialists and the movement or working class people fighting for it, but because the people in power were going to give it to us anyway. So that's why they named this artificial name Jumpstart. But let me tell you this, that you do not see Jumpstart rally photos. You do not see photos of Jumpstart Amazon conferences, Jumpstart car caravans, Jumpstart banners, Jumpstart placards, Jumpstart activist t-shirts. No, you didn't see any of that, because there was no such movement as Jumpstart. Jumpstart is just a label for the narrative that the ruling class seized upon in order to claim that there was no movement that won this. And in fact, it was the Tax Amazon movement that was really put forward by rank and file socialists, union members, and working people.
Now, Logan Swan, you are a union iron worker and a member of the Tax Amazon Coordinating Committee. In the article you wrote in Socialist Alternative about the strategy behind this campaign, you wrote, "This victory did not come from shady negotiations between corporate giants and their paid-for politicians. It happened entirely because of the self-organization of working people through the Tax Amazon movement around a class struggle strategy led by socialists," to which Kshama was just alluding. Now, in that article, you talked about how you had to battle Democrats, business unionism, and corporate media. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as far as like the self-organization of the working class, right? It was the role of the action conferences, which were a critical component of the campaign. It was where working people could discuss, debate, and organize the best strategy to win, rather than being like presented with something, you know, an already worked out campaign, you know, by professional professional activists, you know, and that's something that, you know, we would be told to, oh, this is the campaign, take it or leave it. People could have real ownership over our movement. The action conferences were also where we elected the coordinating committee, which allowed for tighter organization and accountability of movement leadership, discussing and addressing key developments and hurdles we confronted, which were not small ones, right? We had actually begun building this campaign, and then COVID hit. And so how do we carry out a grassroots campaign where the backbone of it is volunteers and regular working people getting together and making these decisions when we no longer can meet you know, at Washington Hall, or, you know, at you know, to have hundreds of working people in the same place at the same time. And yeah, these were a decisive feature of both the 15 Now and Tax Amazon campaign, as far as how they were able to succeed. And yeah, I think to elaborate on like the role of leadership, right? Those are two make or break questions of how working and oppressed people can win change. Sometimes movements fail or fall short of what could have been won, but other times we've seen not just important reforms, but revolutionary change. So what approach and strategy do we have? Basically, you know, do we try to beg based on what the bosses are willing to accept and negotiate down from there? Or do we have a fighting campaign focused on organizing in workplaces and communities where what's possible is only limited by how many workers and youth we can get marching with us? The second question is a bit more of a statement, and that's that leadership is important. Like Kshama was talking about, like just because someone's in a key position of authority or influence and says nice things doesn't mean that they're on our side or helping to lead our movements. Having a leadership rooted in the movement, accountable to the movement, and that understands the priority of building the movement is indispensable. You know, the energy of organized working people is not like a bargaining chip that gets brought into you know, backroom deals with the political establishment. Like that is the momentum, that is the battering ram that forces the bosses and the capitalist class to grant concessions. So yeah, having you know, this is this is in contrast to the so-called, you know, leadership that sees its role as holding closed-door meetings with the bosses. You know, so having a socialist like Kshama in City Hall, who doesn't take money from big business and stakes everything on her connection to workers like us, is exactly what I'm talking about. And I think earlier, you know, Reverend Jeffries brought forward like that piece of history of the assassination of Edwin Pratt. You know, and how the Democrat political establishment and the ruling class immediately set out carrying out racist gentrification and undermining the painstaking work of movement leaders and activists, and, you know, the sacrifices of regular working people and oppressed people. And, you know, we, like was mentioned, you know, we were campaigning and got 30,000 signatures in the context of the pandemic. With this explosion of the Justice for George Floyd movement onto the demanding justice, but not just justice around police brutality, but justice against systemic racism. And part of that is that legacy of racist gentrification. And that was something that, you know, I think was really clearly, you know, one of the key demands was invest in our communities, right? And having a focus of, you know, making big business, you know, the capitalist class being responsible for propagating racism. And for, you know, when we talk about systemic racism, that's the capitalist system, and it relies on racism to be able to further exploit sections of the working class and to divide us. And so, yeah, like much like we see with the kind of immediately setting on the victories of the movements, following, taking out a movement leader. I think we can see, already while we're faced with this recall, the rest of the political establishment here in Seattle, set about undoing our crowd control weapons victory that we won in the summer, as well as proposing a regional approach where they talked about, the big question was, what do they do with the Amazon tax and how do they basically liquidate it into their regional approach, which they always promise when they're trying to get us to swallow a bitter pill. And 15 would also be under attack if we hadn't inspired workers across the country with our successful campaign. So yeah, I think I've been speaking for a while, so I'll stop there.
Well, that's great. And I love the fact that this money is going to be going towards green union jobs to build affordable social housing. And we could talk about the importance of that. I know in California, right before I moved out, Alex Lee, a progressive legislator, introduced a bill to build social housing in California, which is really the antidote to the neoliberal way of building housing, which is to incentivize developers somehow, and then somehow this housing will take place. So I want to move on to Konstantine, because in Logan's article, he wrote, if any socialist elected officials across the country are looking to wage a similar battle against big business, Socialist Alternative and our council office would love to provide any and all support. So I assume that my next guest, who is Konstantine Anthony, a Socialist City Council member from Burbank, California, took you up on that. Hi, Konstantine, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, Lauren. I've been a huge fan of yours. I've been reading your work for years, and California is sad to have lost you.
Yeah, I'm so sorry not to have met you in person and had you on my show. But anyway, so I read about you that you are a formerly homeless Uber driver who organized campaigns around affordable housing and homelessness in Burbank. So were you inspired by what Seattle has done? And what kind of help have you been getting from the Socialist Alternative?
Yeah, I based my campaign basically on my own lived experience here in Southern California. Anyone who's not in Southern California knows that the rent here is just too damn high. It is ridiculous. The housing crisis mixed with years and years of exclusionary housing practices, the zoning laws, I mean, you name it. I live in the city of Burbank, and up until about 50 years ago, maybe 55 years ago, we were a red line district. I mean, it's crazy how close in generations we saw the abusive practices of housing, and the control of the zoning is put to the test right on the backs of working class people. So what I did when I ran was build a coalition. My whole purpose and my whole point of seeking office was to give voice to the people. And only in the last 150 years of this country, only the socialist movement has done that, given that language and that power and that ability to grassroots, not just candidates, I'm talking about outside of electoral politics, just organizations to push change and write laws and change the way we just do business. I mean, I sat, for years between elections. I lost the first time I ran, and I went out and I started collecting signatures for rent control. I mean, there wasn't a candidate on the ballot, and there wasn't someone, preaching change and wanted to do this and that. I just, I did exactly what Kshama and her team did. We went to the ballot, and we got working class people to put their name on the dotted line and force a movement and force a change. And that got put on the ballot on the same day of the election that my name was actually on the ballot. And so it forced a conversation to happen that never would have occurred if we didn't get thousands and thousands and thousands of working class people signing on the dotted line, donating to the campaigns, putting in their pennies on the dollar. I mean, when we look at the amount of money that is held by the corporate interests and by the people who are already in power, we have to realize that, I'm looking at the donations, $27 coming in from an individual is never going to meet the level of what the establishment has unless we match it with 10 other folks. And that's what we've got. We've got the numbers on our side. We've got the people. So we can get a movement going. We can force a narrative. We can force the messaging. We can change hearts and minds. I mean, just last night, I saw on MSNBC, Ali Velshi, a Kenyan-born Muslim who was out there advocating against the Israeli strikes on Palestine. You never would have seen that happen on mainstream media in the last 50 years if we didn't see this huge movement happening out on the streets. On yesterday, there were 10,000, I think almost 15,000 people in front of the federal building here in LA on Wilshire Boulevard near the 405. It was incredible. I've never seen anything like that, specifically for that movement. I mean, it was huge, and they were loud, and there were people from all spectrums of political ideology out there. It was a grassroots movement of working class people who said, no, enough is enough. And
Well,
we can take that and move with it.
I need to talk to you about you have your own campaign to tax Amazon. So because I have two other people to interview, I want you to talk about that and how it's going.
Sure, I'll correct you one thing though. It's not my movement. It's actually a grassroots movement. The people here have taken the words that we ran on in the campaign and they moved it for themselves. They're tying it to fund a Green New Deal here in Burbank. They want to build social housing. They want to get rent relief to people who haven't been able to pay the rent because of the pandemic, build a new library here in the city, all kinds of pay the teachers. Our teachers are so underfunded in this district. It's incredible that they're working on just pennies every day. So that movement has taken on a life of its own. It's incredible to watch. And I'm helping them, I'm guiding them through it, I'm giving them tips. But boy, it is just an amazing sight to see that this big organization happens without the top-down leadership that we always think needs to happen. You can have leaders in the movement, but the power comes from beneath, from the ground up.
Yeah, well, Kshama's doing a lot of organizing in her office. I mean, I was reading in Jonathan Rosenblum's article in The Nation, organizing out of her city council office, Sawant held town hall meetings, led marches demanding city action, and sponsored petitions and mass letter writing campaigns to elected officials. Sawant legislative initiatives that began with scant support among other council members, like blocking construction of a new militarized police station in 2016, ended up getting adopted by the city council after these sustained public demonstrations. So I'm particularly interested in how she's organizing like an activist as an elected official.
Oh, yeah.
That is what I was asking you about.
Oh, yeah. When you elect organizers like Kshama into office, and that's part of why I got into this business in the first place. You get an organizer like that who already knows how to do good work with very little power, and you give them just one seat at the table. I mean, the sky's the limit. Just look at what Kshama's been doing. And she's only one member of the council, and she's brought all of Seattle with her. And that change, it happens when you elect organizers into office, grassroots organizers, and you put them in positions of power. It's incredible to see it happen.
Great. So before I go to my next guest, thank you, Konstantine.
Thank you.
I want to say that we did get $27 from Bill C., $27 from John M., $50 from Matthew L., Susan I gave $27. John B gave $200. Way to go, John B. Tyler R gave $15, and Daryl B gave $200. So I guess if your last name begins with B, you have to give $200, folks. And where you donate is KshamaSolidarity.org/telethon. That's KshamaSolidarity.org/telethon. Okay, so my next guest is Peggy Hote. And I wanted to say, Peggy, that in researching you, I found that you were a suburban mom 15 years ago who decided to spend one night a week sleeping in downtown homeless encampments. And now you are a major organizer of legalized encampments. I wish I had a whole half hour just to discuss your journey. But for this show, can you tell us how you came to work with Kshama's office on the legalized encampments, the tiny home villages, and what you were able to accomplish. And you need to unmute.
There it is.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Sorry.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. I've been a progressive for about 30 years, and I've been working with homeless people for about 20 years of that time. And during that span, homelessness has exploded in the Seattle and King County area from about 4,000 people to now I would estimate about 16,000 homeless people. It used to be mostly men who lost their jobs, and now it's men and women who've lost their jobs. And it's oftentimes people who have lost their families and their communities because those families and communities would not accept people as they are. Seattle's economy's been overwhelmed by tech industries, particularly Amazon, in the last quarter of a century. And that's what's created the massive amount of homelessness that Seattle sees now. The two groups that I have worked with are Seattle Housing and Resource Effort, or SHARE, and Nicholsville. And while these days I'm mostly working with Nicholsville, both of those groups of homeless organizations are democratically organized. So that's pretty unique, I think, in the country. So the homeless people themselves set the agenda for what they work on. So Nicholsville and SHARE communities have always chosen to focus on shelter and community, because Seattle's elite has failed to understand the damage that the economy's done to people that are on the margins. It's been crucial that we form alliances with those who understand the damage being done. And we're groups that have always had to take desperate measures like direct action without permission of property owners. We've done that quite a few times in order to begin our communities. Unfortunately, the city government has often tried to dismantle and scatter those homeless communities. Kshama Sawant and Socialist Alternative understand our position, and they understand the power of their position within City Hall. They're smart and they're fearless. As comrades, their solidarity and suggestions have been invaluable. Our needs and demands have been strategically incorporated into something that happens every year when Sawant's office organizes people's budget. So that's been a platform for us where we can explain our needs in our community that we wouldn't have been able to do on our own. Our communities learned about other dispossessed and discriminated groups who formed the coalition fighting for the people's budget. And we've learned about and become allies with groups that we never would have encountered otherwise. And that's worked really well for us. Some examples include several times when our mayor has cut our self-managed shelters and villages from the people's budget, and they've succeeded in restoring that funding. That's been really critical for us. Our community and the people's budget then were basic tools in established funding for encampments in tiny house villages, including Nicholsville, which is self-managed and very effective at keeping our people safe compared to other homeless communities. For example, we in our villages did not have a single case of COVID in those communities. Every year, the support for tiny houses has increased thanks to this movement-based approach that Kshama takes. As the COVID pandemic began, our mayor ordered threatened one of our tiny house villages, Nicholsville North Lake, to be closed during the pandemic. And that would have scattered people and destroyed this nice community that they had created. So Kshama launched right away, her office, and Kshama launched a petition that attracted more signatures than any similar local initiative ever has. And our mayor gave in, our mayor bowed to that pressure, and Nicholsville North Lake continues to this day. I was there yesterday for a little party they had, and they don't have any plans to move off of that city-owned property. The movement, working with Sawant's office, built on that success of keeping North Lake from being evicted to gain a moratorium on all rental evictions during the pandemic, with a handful of exceptions. There's no doubt in my mind that the moratorium on evictions has prevented thousands of people, more people, from becoming homeless. And those North Lake leaders who spoke up to keep their own community going also spoke up during the renters moratorium, the fight to have that. And that was very powerful, their testimony, because they talked about how they had been evicted, and that led to their homelessness. So that was a good thing for both movements. So the success of the first eviction has led to several more eviction moratoriums in Seattle. Kshama and office know what's caused the economic devastation of our community. They've given us a chance to use their platform to speak truth to power. We've learned that standing in coalition and fighting gets the goods. When we fight, we can win. This is why rich and powerful people in Seattle want Kshama out of office so badly. And it's also why we think it's really important that we keep her in.
Great. Okay. I would love to ask you some more questions, but unfortunately, I still have one more guest to interview and we're running a little bit over. So I'm going to let you go and maybe you can come on my show at a future time to talk about some of the things you've worked on. So now I'm going to go to Lou Della Bowen, who is someone I can't see right now because of some technical difficulties, but I did see her at a press conference video that was organized by Kshama's office. And she introduced herself as a resident of the Brighton apartments. It's really weird not to be looking at you, Lou Della, but I believe you're hearing me. So you said you are a senior citizen on a fixed income and rent was becoming unaffordable. You talked about the need for everybody in this situation to collectively band together for rent control. So I'm curious, did you first approach Kshama or were you approached by her?
We approached Kshama. We went to a city hall meeting. You know, we did everything we could do, and that was the last resort. And I just want to say that Kshama she just jumped right in, you know, and I have an unusual name and most of the time they never pronounce it right, but it was amazing that she remembered my name. And before we left, after we had our group had our say, she said to be sure and stop by Jonathan and, you know, and get our names. And they help us organize and they stuck with us and they just did everything, came to our meetings and just helped us to get a stay of rent. And I am truly grateful. I really am. And I kind of got a little upset when I seen this recall thing. It's like, well, if they get her out, who's going to fight for us? You know, that's our last hope, our knight in shining armor, you know? And so I really appreciate her. I appreciate everything she's doing, you know, not just for the Brighton, but for, you know, the working class and the lesser advantaged people, you know, and that's not too many people that would do that and put their life on the line and have to go through so much that she goes through, but she keeps on fighting, you know. And we want her to know here at the Brighton, we just love her. Her name is very popular around here, and I never forget to remind them of Kshama, you know, that she is a wonderful person, and you don't find very many. I don't know anybody else that would do what she does untiringly, you know. And I always say, when does she sleep? Because she's everywhere. She's everywhere, you know. But I want her to know that we really appreciate her because we've had to stay on rent now for 2 years. And a lot of things that we had been fighting for, they're actually doing it, putting in cameras, they put in an electric gate, you know, they're remodeling, they just doing a lot of things. And within the last 2 years, our rent has only gone up like $5 a year. And also they gave us little jobs here, paying us $15 an hour of things to do to kind of get a decrease on our rent.
So the campaign, I understood the campaign was for a rent freeze, and you're telling me that there was a lot more that was accomplished just than a rent.
Absolutely, because of Kshama, you know how you start something, but you really don't know all of the in and outs. They would never let us talk to the board, you know, they just kept throwing us off. So we going, well, we go. So we decided to go downtown, and that's how we got results.
Well, I want to just say that.
And then, of course, the new people came on.
You're kind of breaking up.
The board member really. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's just kind of going in.
Hello?
And out. Yeah.
Okay, we have kind of bad reception in this building at time because it's a lot of concrete. But the ball is rolling now. Like I said, a lot of things that we don't have any complaints at this time because, you know, the people that are in charge, the guy that's remodeling apartments and his wife, who is the president of the board, they're really working with us and hearing what we have to say and really trying to help us.
Well, I think this is great. And like I said to the other guests, I'd love to talk to you more too, but we have to move on. And I just want to say
fine.
that I find all of this extremely novel. An elected official organizing press conferences, marches with activists, organizing action collective meetings, boot camps for renters' rights, having a community organizer on staff. I mean, these kind of activities are usually organized by activists. I've never met an elected official to do these things. And
Right.
I actually asked Pramila Jayapal on my show last year how, as a former activist, she was going to use outside groups to get Medicare for All passed. And she didn't give me nearly any of these specifics. So I hope she's watching, and I hope she takes some notes as to how to be an effective elected official organizer, because we sure need that for Medicare for All. And now I'm going to pass it back to Matt, who's going to introduce our next host, who is a very good friend of mine, Jamal Thomas.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lauren. And I just want to emphasize a couple things that were said on that panel. Lauren mentioned at the beginning, Lauren approached the Kshama Solidarity campaign about leading this telethon and organizing this. And that's the kind of initiative that I think this movement's going to need to win, against this recall campaign or any of these big things that we're fighting for. You know, Medicare for All was mentioned at the end there. We need that kind of movement to win. And also, Ludella mentioned, she had approached Kshama and the council office about waging this fight at those apartments for affordable housing. And this is the strength of the movement, right? This is, we heard Reverend Jeffrey speak earlier about his involvement with the Amazon tax fight, where we were able to win a serious victory for racial justice inside of that housing justice movement, where we got dedicated funds put into building housing, building affordable housing in the Central District of Seattle, which is a historically Black community that has been gentrified over the course of decades. And we're putting affordable housing back into that neighborhood because of that united movement, because of things like the People's Budget, which Peggy mentioned as part of that. Kshama doesn't take a seat at the table with the bosses. She builds a new table of working class activists, of community activists to fight for what we need, not what big business is willing to accept. And this is exactly what we're doing now. The reason that Kshama has been able to wage these fights at the same time that she's being recalled, we've won things like the right to counsel. We've won things, during this recall period. Kshama just announced a fight for rent control, right? She's going on the offensive despite being under attack. And that's only because we have this movement. And I want to read off some of the names of people who have donated. These donations make these kinds of things possible. Daniel M, these are people who've given $27. Daniel M, Daniel S, Tatiana Z, Maddie Z, Arlen E, Jennifer I, Jean Z, Greg C, Lori F, Matthew S, Jove P, Chuck B, Julie N, Perry R, Brian H, Jason C, Joe M. All of those people have given just in the past, while that panel was speaking. Those donations add up. And then we have a lot of sacrifice coming in from people who've given $100, Alexandra M, Steve R, Todd A, Ariel, Peggy D giving 15, Stephen K giving $15. All of these donations are part of this movement that allow us to fight back. We're only as strong as the people here in this room, as the movement activists who are chipping into this campaign in Seattle and around the country, who are knocking on doors. And this is just absolutely key. So keep on donating. Go to that donation link, shamasolidarity.org/telethon. And I'm going to introduce the next panel here, talking about, this is not just a fight in Seattle. This is not just a fight nationally. This is a fight internationally. And we've seen, what's happening in Palestine. We've seen what's happening in Colombia recently. This is an international fight that we are waging against this system. So I want to introduce Jamal Thomas, who is the host of the Progressive Soapbox. He's going to be introducing this panel, talking about the importance of internationalism. Go over to you.
Thank you
Jamal.
very much. Guys, I want to thank you for inviting me to this. Lauren, I appreciate it. And Sharma, before I start, I want to thank you in general. I've watched you in Seattle for a while now, especially with the Amazon fight, even before, but especially during that. And for you to win that victory immediately after, and for them to still be after you on top of that. So, congratulations for winning the fight, but it's unfortunate that you're gonna have to end up in another one that soon. But to introduce my team, this is going to be a panel on working class internationalism and the role of socialists in office. We're, of course, joined by Kshama Sawant. We are also joined by Susan Fitzgerald, Socialist Party of Ireland and union activist. Ravine, and please forgive me if I messed this name, Kaushik, Coalition of Seattle Indian Americans, and Shujarta Ramani, Coalition of Seattle Indian Americans. I apologize if I missed any of the names. But let's start at I guess the most obvious thing that's taking place right now. Joe Biden put out a tweet from the White House. Today, the president spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reaffirm his strong support for Israel's right to defend itself against rockets from Hamas and other terrorist groups in Gaza, and condemn the indiscriminate attacks against Israel. From the standpoint of internationalism, is there anything in getting across this idea that Palestinians have a right to self-defense? Because it doesn't necessarily seem like something that, at the very least, is on either Blinken's or Biden's or the mind of America in general from the standpoint of policy. And I guess a further point on this, do you think that point of view is changing? There was an argument back and forth the other day on whether or not let's say the sand is shifting on this thing of Israel and its ability to indiscriminately kill Palestinians without there being any kind of consequence, or for that matter, even any pushback from America. We have maybe 5 members, 10 members at most in Congress that may be pushing back on this. And I'll go to you immediately, Sharma. Do you think this is changing? And from the standpoint of internationalism and the role that it plays in, I guess you could say, changing minds and reaching out, does it play a role in trying to get, I guess you can say, some movement on this issue, especially in the context of America and the amount of money or the amount of support that we give to Israel as it does things like this?
I think the question of internationalism and international solidarity among working people and oppressed people, as I think you've correctly highlighted, that's a very important component of this conversation. And also the other part that you, I think, correctly highlighted also, and I'm glad you brought that in, is have things shifted a little bit in a way that is different than even 10 or 15 years ago. And I think both of those things are absolutely true. I mean, first of all, let's be really clear. The people of Gaza, the Palestinian people, are the oppressed. This is not a situation where you can say both sides have done something wrong. The people of Gaza did not start this conflict. Netanyahu and the Israeli ruling class right now have carried out this violence, but this is, of course, part of a decades-long and systematic program of violence, discrimination, apartheid, racism, and imperialism that is being directed by the Israeli state against the Palestinian people in this region, and is also an example of the way in which capitalism, which imperialism goes hand in hand with global capitalism. It's an example of how capitalism works as a whole. And so it's important to understand who's at fault here and also to situate it in the larger question of capitalism itself. And that is why it is shameful, really, that Biden has, has through his statements continued the decades-long U.S. policy of saying, the Israeli state is the aggressor here. The Israeli ruling class, especially now, extremely right-wing ruling class, is the aggressor here. And yet Biden has said that they have the quote-unquote right to defend themselves. I mean, this is a complete distortion of reality and extremely destructive and dangerous, because then it equates anything that people will do to defend themselves with the brutality or the scale of the attack by the Israeli regime. And obviously we have to, on the left, oppose indiscriminate firing of rockets against civilians, but also we have a moral and political responsibility to understand that they come as a response to the brutal attacks from the Israeli regime, from the Netanyahu government, and we have to condemn the outrageous attempt by the Israeli regime to use whatever response or retaliation they're getting as a justification to carry out immeasurably more devastating bombings and military attacks that they have already wrought on countless defenseless Palestinian civilians. And that is why it is so crucial for us to take a very, very clear stance on this. And to your second point, I think it's absolutely true that things have shifted. And I agree with you that there are only 5 or 6 Congress members who have spoken up about this. But even that, we have to note, is a complete shift from from the situation we had, the political sort of status quo that we've had so far, where not a single Democrat would speak up about this. And I applaud Congress members Ocasio-Cortez, Tlaib, and other members of the squad, not only speaking out against the Israeli attacks on Gaza, but also criticizing the Biden regime. And also we should note that this is happening because clearly there is pressure on the left-wing Democrats to speak up about this. So that's what's changed. I mean, there's right now, a historic shift is going on where millions of young people are not going to accept this kind of blatant oppression and imperialism. But at the same time, we can't stop there. As socialists, that's why we are demanding that Biden condemn the brutal attacks and stop the military aid and weapon sales to Israel. But we also have to raise the question, alongside international solidarity, of the need for Palestinian and Israeli working class people to build solidarity amongst themselves, because that is the only way that they will be able to defeat this brutal occupation. And that united movement of working class people has to demand an end to occupation and war on the people of Gaza, for full civil rights for all Muslims and oppressed people in the region, an end to apartheid policies, affordable housing, and free socialized medicine for all working people in Israel and Gaza. And ultimately, this has to shine a light on the need for socialism in not only in the region, but internationally.
Yes, absolutely. And going further from the standpoint of internationalism, let's stay with that one for the moment. How do you view, when people talk about socialism, they often talk about internationalism in association with socialism. How do you view it as it relates to international affairs in regards to what you do, or for that matter, your role as a socialist? How do you view it, in international terms?
I think that fundamentally it is important to understand how capitalism works. In other words, one aspect of the way global capitalism works is there is competition among corporations, within the billionaire class, among nation states. Capitalism is a global system, but it's divided into nation states. So the US ruling class has its own interest. The Indian ruling class, for example, my home country, have their own interests, and there will be competition among them for the spoils of the war that they inflict in a perpetual mode against working class people, billions of people worldwide. And at the same time, they will be united in their overall defense of a deeply exploitative system. And so all of this reality of the way global capitalism functions poses a very serious question of working class people being united amongst one another, because that is the only way that we can push back against what is otherwise an inevitable and inexorable and never-ending race to the bottom for billions of people. Just to give you a concrete example, when we were fighting for the $15 minimum wage in Seattle, one of the favorite talking points of big business and the ruling class that was bitterly opposed, fiercely opposed to $15 an hour, was to say that if we want 15 here, then actually it will end up making the working class in Seattle worse off, because then the jobs would move to other places. In fact, This was exactly the kind of statement that was used by Boeing, for example, to extort from Boeing workers, saying, well, we'll ship the jobs to South Carolina. Well, how do you fight against this? You have to flip that race to the bottom on its head and say, we're going to fight this race to the bottom with nationwide, across states solidarity among workers, and then extend that to international solidarity as well.
Interesting. You're making the point that there is no such thing as socialism locally, because there can always be this kind of expanding the playing field in regards to using that as a threat against workers. I would love to get into this conversation about technology also in the way that that plays into it. But and before we move on to the next guest, we have a few donations. We have Neil M with 400. We have Jerome for 15. We have Marcus for 7. We have Neil O for 27. We have Brent M for 50. And we also have Alan S for 100. Guys, thank you. If you want to contribute, you can do so at, let me see, I had this written down and I lost track of it, but I will find it. There we are. Thank you. Thank you. SharmaSolidarity.org/telethon. That's KSHARMA solidarity.org/telethon. And to go to our next guest, we have Sujata, and that is Sujata Ramani. Then this is for Coalition, or you are from Coalition for Seattle Indian Americans. The Seattle City Council has just passed a resolution calling on the Biden administration to support an end to patents of the COVID vaccine. Now, I understand you are involved in that. And shortly after that resolution passed, the Biden administration announced that they would support the patent waiver. Do you think that the resolution in Seattle, which was the first in the country, may have had an impact on that, even if it was small? And can you explain the significance of the vaccine apartheid? I mean, basically, you have some countries, or the wealthier countries, that basically have access to the vaccines because they basically make the vaccines, with the other countries not having access. And the argument is pretty straightforward, or the logic of it is pretty straightforward. Richer countries have every incentive in the world to ensure that their own populations are vaccinated, which creates a shortage of vaccines in the poor countries. How do you view this in regards to the vaccine apartheid? Do you think that the resolution that you guys worked on influenced Biden in his choice to basically take the patents or not enforce the patents?
Thank you. Jai Bhim, first of all. This is a rally cry that translates to victory to the working class and the marginalized. The fight for medical and vaccine equity has been a long one over many decades, such as that for affordable drugs for the AIDS pandemic. Many organizations, including Washington Fair Trade, CAGJ, Global Trade Watch, have been putting pressure on the administration since late last year, from about the time that we knew that vaccines were in the horizon. The resolution on the TRIPS waiver in Seattle was a significant one because it was the first time that an elected legislative body declared its intention publicly and asked that the local congressperson reflect its position at the federal level. As an Indian American, the reality of vaccine apartheid couldn't be more grim than what I witnessed in the US and in India. In my own experience in the US, my family and I have now been meeting friends and family, enjoying the good weather outside. We recently celebrated Eids together, planned road trips and such. And the only reason that we've been able to step out of a 15-month-long isolation is because we have all been vaccinated. On the other hand, we're witnessing colossal numbers of lives lost in India as we speak. 400,000 daily cases and 4,000 daily deaths. Even though I come from the immensely privileged and oppressor Brahmin caste, even in those communities, every day, I wake up to the news of friends, neighbors, colleagues, and family falling sick and dying. The situation of working class and marginalized majority in India is indescribable. People are dying, gasping for breath. And all of this suffering could have been prevented if only we all had access to vaccines. I also want to give some perspective from the side of the organizing public in working with Kshama's office and what it means to have a progressive elected representative in the city council. Seattle has consistently been at the vanguard of progressive movements, and a big part of it is because we voted a strong progressive candidate like Kshama Sawant. Whether it is the push to defund the police department, condemn escalations with Iran, denounce the Indian Citizenship Amendment Act, the Indian farm laws, tax Amazon to pay for affordable housing and COVID relief. I'm repeating myself, along with the other activists who've spoken thus far, but we would have had much, much less traction, impact, and momentum on these fights if we had left it to the rest of the council as it stands today. Yes. They are all Democrat, but they unfortunately need to be shamed into doing the right thing. And even there, they wave symbolic gestures at us, but never deliver anything that is of substance. And what the movement needs right now is more progressive candidates across elected positions in Seattle City, in other cities, in Congress, and in other countries as well. A recall measure against Kshama is a complete regression that will set the movement back by years. And we have to do everything to ensure that we have a concerted national and international effort to fight back against this recall, because justice for working class and marginalized communities hinges on it.
Yes, I agree. It would be a disaster if the recall effort went through and the way that they're trying to make it. Basically, these right-wing ideologues basically trying to pull Kshama out of office. The next guest that we're going with is Raghav Kaushik, Coalition for Seattle Indian Americans. Well, I apologize, Sujat. I've screwed up my order slightly. I'm sorry. Sujata Ramani. And then can you help me pronounce your first name? I apologize.
Oh, not at all. It's Sujata.
Sujata.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sujata Ramani. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Raghav Kaushik, Coalition for Seattle Indian Americans. And am I on the right person, Raghav?
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, there we are. The movement in Seattle is once some other resolution that deals with international policy. Now, you were involved with the struggle to win a resolution urging the Indian government to repeal the Citizenship Amendment, CAA, and stop the National Register of Citizens, NRC. Can you tell us more about that and what impact it's had on politics all the way in India?
Sure. Actually, before I get to the direct answer to your question, I want to continue the theme that Sujata ended on. Before I was involved in the Citizenship Amendment Act, movement and all that. About a decade ago, I was involved in the Bhopal campaign. Bhopal gas leak. There was solidarity movements fighting for the survivors out here, and there were some in Seattle as well. And I was involved in that. The reason I'm bringing that up is because, we did try to work with city council at the time. And so I want to kind of contrast that experience with what happened with CAA and RC. So back then there was this impression of city council as this ivory tower, and I think that is accurate. It's not just an impression. City council was this ivory tower. If you wanted to get anything done, God knows what happened in the city council, right? I had no idea what happened there. But if you wanted to do anything, you had to shame people. That's true, through public pressure. But if you wanted to really have somebody in city council working with you, then you had to kind of know the movers and shakers in society, right? People who had breakfast as city council members, who went to golf with them. That was the sort of world we lived in. In the case of Bhopal, we did manage to finally get some modest support from Nick Picata, and we got a Seattle city proclamation passed, but we had to jump through all these hoops to get there. And the reason I'm bringing all of this up is to contrast with the entire dynamic that is currently there, right? So Kshama and Socialist Alternative have entirely redefined the dynamic of city council. And the city council is now a voice of movements. That's a reshaping that happened because of Kshama Sawant's office, right? That's the kind of world we live in now, right? And even in terms of issues that are taken up, right? Like I said, back then, nobody even knew what city council was doing. There were just a bunch of people doing something in an ivory tower, and nobody knew. The idea that you can fight for minimum wage, the idea that you can fight for tax Amazon, wow, like I had no idea this was even possible, right? And so even raising our expectations, which goes to the theme of social city council being an extension of social movements, that was really, Kshama's and SA's contribution, right? A huge contribution. It really reshaped it. I can't overstate how much of an impact it had on the entire activist base here. Like, it's incredibly inspiring to say that, well, you can amplify your movement through an ally in city council, right? And the allyship would be formed based on solidarity, based on shared values, based on strong movements, not based on social networking. So we knew that, and that it's important to point that out. Specifically on CA and RC, in order to understand this, you have to first start with the Modi regime, right? The Modi regime, which is still in power in India. So Modi regime is a far-right regime, sort of like Trump, and that's not just my opinion. The New York Times described Modi and Trump as, quote, twins separated by a continent. And I think that is accurate, right? They are twins separated by a continent. You can think of the Citizenship Amendment Act, the CAA law, as sort of loosely equivalent to the Indian equivalent of the Muslim ban here, right? Trump's Muslim ban. So it was basically encoding Islamophobia in the immigration laws. And the National Register of Citizens, the other thing, the NRC, was basically an attempt, it was a threat. They carried it out in one state and threatening to take it nationwide. It was a threat to disenfranchise hundreds of millions of Indians and Muslims, caste oppressed, indigenous, others, right? Together, these were, in terms of scale, right? The impact of these laws was huge. And people in India recognized it, right? There was an unprecedented uprising. And until COVID came, if COVID hadn't come, probably the uprising would have been continuing until today, right? It was, after Indian independence, one of the biggest uprisings in India ever. And, not surprisingly, we had a grassroots movement out here in the Seattle area to show solidarity with that. And in contrast with the experience with the Bhopal campaign and all that, reaching out to Kshama, it was such a natural act of solidarity. We almost knew that if Kshama would offer us solidarity in this, and not surprisingly, that's what happened. The same template that SA follows in all its campaigns applied to this as well. We had a movement, we used the city council office, we got support from the city council office, we used the city council office to pass a resolution to amplify the message of the movement, right? The impact of that was huge, right? There are several examples to illustrate the impact. Seattle was, incidentally, the uprising in India happened. Seattle was basically the first place to show international solidarity, right? It was a leader in the international front. The impact of that, there were several examples to illustrate it. In Shaheen Bagh, which was like the epicenter of the uprising in India, sort of like the Indian equivalent of the Tahrir Square when Arab Spring was happening a decade ago. People there, we heard reports of people there celebrating when we won the Seattle City Council resolution. So it meant a lot for them, right? And the other examples of impact were, as soon as Seattle City passed its resolution, there was follow-up actions from various cities in the country, in the United States, as well as around the world. So there was the snowball effect that happened. The right wing recognized the importance of what we did, right? It was extremely, you'll be amazed how contested it was. I've never seen a more divided crowd in city council office before, right? Clearly the right wing, the Indian diaspora here, which has a significant right wing presence, saw the significance of what was happening, and they came out to oppose what Kshama and all of us were doing. So you could see the impact there, and the Indian Consulate General felt it fit to send a letter to Kshama saying, why did you withdraw what you're doing? Because they also saw the importance of what we were doing. So there were all of these signs of what was happening, of the significance of this resolution. So I just wanted to kind of wrap up on that note, but I want to finally tell you by saying that I want to point out what is at stake with the recall, right? So what is at stake with the recall is if we lose the recall, if the recall goes through, then there's a very real danger that city council will slip back to its ivory tower days and will have a very demoralizing impact on all of us. So I just wanted to point out what's at stake. So we have to really resist it with all our might.
Yeah, I am a big fan of Kshama. I mean, just from my side of, yes, I'm on the East Coast. But like I said, she's been one of the political figures that have been a luminary. And I could imagine that it would be somewhat of a demoralizing experience, especially losing contact with somebody who's somewhat down to earth, where you guys can make contact with in order to kind of to magnify your message. For the last person, we have all the way from Ireland, Susan Fitzgerald. She's Socialist Party member, Ireland, and union activist. Susan, you're tuning all the way from Ireland. You're also a socialist and a union leader. How does the work that Kshama's office and the movement in Seattle relate to what you're doing in Ireland? And thank you for joining us.
Hi, Jamal. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much. I think on a practical level, activists in Ireland have enjoyed and relied on important solidarity from Kshama, Kshama traveling to Ireland to speak in favour of and support the very historic campaign for reproductive rights in the south of Ireland,
yes,
to the support of socialist alternative activists and Kshama into shipyard workers in Belfast when they successfully occupied to keep their jobs and keep their yard open. Just in the last couple of days, I've spent yesterday and today picketing with workers who are on an all-out strike against their employer here for equal pay. It's quite a daunting strike. The owners are vulture capitalists, and it can seem quite a difficult battle, and it is. But when you get a chance to explain the David and Goliath battle of tax Amazon and the role played by activists in Seattle against the richest man in the world, obviously there's more to it than that. It actually starts to shift the balance of the conversation about the fight that these workers are up against. So it's not just the practical hands-on solidarity that we've enjoyed, it's the example setting that we've been able to use and capitalise on. And I think there's no question that where there are struggles in Ireland, activists would be aware of Kshama Sawant, because when you engage in battle, you want confirmation that you can win. You want confirmation that you're not alone. So I think people seek this out. So here you have a leader and an organisation who have taken this council position and put it at the disposal of the working class of Seattle. And actually, if you listen to what Rajav has said, the intervention into the incredible BLM movement, the vaccine patent campaign, put this seat at the disposal of the working class and oppressed internationally. And again, on the basis of doing that, have seen important wins, and those wins have been stacking up. So this attack, outrageous and blatant as it is, in some ways is no surprise. So I was honoured last year to get a chance to speak in Seattle at the Tax Amazon rally. But while I was there and speaking to activists, it kind of occurred to me that Socialist Kshama and the campaign and Kshama's office have only actually held this position for around 7 years. It's relatively speaking, it's not that long. But if you look at what's been achieved, not just those wins that have stacked up, but completely transforming politics in Seattle. And it's demonstrated what socialists can achieve when aligned to workers, to community, and what a challenge that has been to other political forces in Seattle and far, far beyond. There's a famous Irish trade union leader from the past, James Larkin. He spent a lot of time actually as a trade unionist in the US as well. And he described his fight against poverty, pay, and degradation as a divine mission of discontent. And I think that divine mission has been revived in Seattle over the last 7.5 years. And it's imperative that it continues. using the council position, Kshama's office, you used this phrase yourself, Jamala, has magnified and multiplied the power that the working class has. The cutting edge of that has been those historic breakthroughs that other speakers have referred to. And that's what leadership is. You strive to magnify and multiply our power. So just two last quick points. I think the work in Seattle and out of Kshama's office has represented internationally the genuine aspirations of working class people in the US. Because sometimes when you're watching from a distance, and you know, for a long time, too long, you've seen what Trump put out, etc. What a contrast to the picture painted by Trump and co. These campaigns that are being talked about here today are the antidote to Trump and all he represented, and those distortions about the US working class. So just to finish, Kshama always ends speeches, I've noticed, with the word solidarity. She's a promoter of solidarity. And that's exactly what we need now. We need to go overboard in that solidarity. This is a telethon. Obviously, people watching this are not wealthy, or they wouldn't be watching this. They'd be out doing work for the recall campaign. But for everyone watching this, we all need to dig deep to make sure this campaign is funded, to make sure an issue like finance doesn't stop the powerful campaign, the powerful force that you have behind Kshama and Kshama's office and the broader movement. They're going after Kshama Sawant now, but it's really you that they're after. She's just standing in the way. And any workplace, any worker knows if you have a workplace representative, a shop steward who defends and represents you, that you protect them back, because that's how it works. And that's, you know, solidarity is the cornerstone to every victory that we have a chance of achieving and everything that has been won to date. So I appreciate that we're running tight on time. So maybe I'll leave it there, Jamala, if that's okay.
No, you're fine. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's, again, Susan Fitzgerald, Socialist Party Ireland and union activist. Look, you know, this is one of those things, like you said, it's a telethon. And so, Kshama, I'm always uncomfortable around the ask type thing or ask for assistance. But this is one of those cases where it's well-deserved. You've done phenomenal in your job there. And the pronouncements and the detailing of the things that got accomplished, $15 an hour, the tax to Amazon, especially the tax to Amazon, that has been one of the most, the one I was the most enamored by. But I'm going to end this here and I'm going to turn this back over. You guys have a phenomenal night. And I want to thank all of you for joining us so far. So, Matt.
Thank you, Jamal, and thank you to that panel. Really fantastic. I wanted to say we have now raised almost $3,000 from this telethon. Really phenomenal, but we want to see more. I think we're going to be taking the ticker down for now. We want to see a flood of donations. We want to see 10, 15, 20 more donations, and then we'll put that ticker back up so we can see those people who are donating. Go to shamasolidarity.org/telethon. Let's get above that $3,000 mark. Let's show this recall, show the right wing, show big business, what working people can do when we come together like this as a movement. I'm going to go ahead and move right along to our next panel, which is going to be discussing the $15 minimum wage, both the victory in Seattle, as well as the fight for a federal $15 minimum wage. And the host of this panel is going to be Keaton Weiss, who is the host of the Do Dissidents podcast. And he's going to be introducing the panelists. I will send it over to you, Keaton.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you to all of the co-hosts. I'm a huge fan of all you guys, and I'm a huge fan of all of the panelists that I have been watching so far. I am going to be hosting this panel on the $15 minimum wage and the federal fight for $15. I'm joined by, of course, Kshama herself, Paula Lukasek, president of WFSC 1488 and the UW Fight for $15, Ginger Jensen from 15 Now, Minnesota, and Jonathan Rosenblum, author of Beyond $15 and the lead organizer of the CTAC Fight for 15. Kshama, my first question is to you, and I just have to start by saying what a genuine inspiration you are. And I think a testament to that is the fact that we have people from all around the world in on this fundraiser this evening. And I do want to just plug that donate link, shamasolidarity.org/telethon. They took the ticker down, so I can't give any shout outs at the moment, but for everybody donating, thank you so much. And thank you, Kshama, for all the fantastic work that you've done. So your first campaign for city council in 2013, you campaigned on a $15 minimum wage. And that, of course, predates the 2016 Sanders campaign, where that issue became, sort of a part of the national conversation. It was beyond utopian at that point. And then you helped win that fight less than 6 months after you took office and made Seattle the first major city to pass that wage. I was living in New York City at the time, and me and a bunch of friends were wondering why we weren't in Seattle, because we were all earning far less than $15. So how did that happen? How did you win that fight? And what lessons can we learn in the federal fight for 15 based on what you guys did in Seattle back then?
Thank you, Keaton, and I'll echo your thanks to everybody who has made generous donations for this campaign to defend our Socialist City Council seat against the recall, because really every one of us who identifies as a progressive, let alone socialist, has a stake in it to defeat this recall. And I think in many ways your question about how we won, how we went about it, and how we even won $15 an hour really goes to the heart of how we ran our election campaign in the first place. And I just wanted to highlight that, because I think it provides not only an inspiring, but a politically clarifying example and an important political clarification about what kind of campaigns working class people need, what kind of, how do we actually build a momentum that will deliver results, gains for those of us who are left out of the gains from this system, even though we all go to work every day. And so really, when we launched the campaign for city council, I'm using the pronoun we deliberately, because it wasn't somebody who woke up one day and decided that for their own career and for their own personal aspirations, they're going to run for city council and then they're going to build a campaign around them. It was exactly the opposite. Socialist Alternative, my organization, which has branches nationwide, we together as a democratically organized group of people who have discussion and debate, and we vote on the most important decisions in our organization, we together decided that it made sense in the post-Occupy period. There was an opening for socialists to run a campaign that would raise the banner boldly of working class demands. And at that time, collectively, we saw that the idea of a $15 minimum wage was beginning to capture the imagination of workers nationwide, not just in Seattle. And we immediately put that in the forefront of our campaign's political program, alongside taxing big business and the super rich, and also for rent control in Seattle without corporate loopholes. And the way we ran the campaign itself contains many lessons for how we won $15 an hour, because it also shows the kind of courage and political clarity you need in movements and among people who are leading movements. Because when we first raised the question of $15 an hour in Seattle, many even well-meaning labor leaders actually were very hesitant about it and said, I don't think we should be raising $15 an hour in the city. And in fact, they repeatedly told me and our campaign to not raise the question of $15 an hour. They said we shouldn't be talking about 15. And I think that primarily came from a standpoint of basing whatever they win or whatever they were able to push for in their personal relationships with the Democratic Party politicians. And this goes back to the point that Raghav was making earlier, which is there's a whole nexus, even among well-meaning leaders, of keeping their close circle of influence amongst themselves and deciding what they're going to fight on based on what's acceptable to the influential leaders in that close circle. Well, we don't operate like that. And that's why it's a really good example of how you can win victories, campaign on, and actually win when you use the completely different approach, where you go to the mass of the working class and let them decide whether we should fight on something or not. And that's the approach we used, where we ended up getting phenomenal support from rank and file union members, and we had tremendous labor leaders like Paula, and I'm so thrilled that we have her on the panel today, because they showed a completely different path of actually fighting on something that did not require, we were not going to wait for permission from the Democratic leaders whether to fight on this or not. We were going to go ahead and fight. And I think ultimately the reason we were able to win also was exactly like the reason we won Tax Amazon, the Amazon tax, because we used the same approach of rank and file empowerment. We built action conferences, and ultimately we had a very clear and challenging tactic that forced the Democratic establishment and big business to concede, which was our 15 Now ballot initiative. And you had it from the horse's mouth. Business leaders publicly said that if it hadn't been for a powerful on the street movement in the form of 15 Now that actually built momentum as a credible threat for the ballot initiative, they were not about to concede, and really shows how tactics and strategy and movement building that brings up the rank and file of the movement really matters.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Just a very tangible and simple goal that you could just really hammer on. So thank you so much for that. Paula, I want to go to you since Kshama set you up there. You were part of the $15 fight in Seattle. And then you were also part of the movement when it spread to University of Washington afterwards, because UW did not want to pay the $15 an hour wage. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this
there you are.
This is Paula Kozik. I'm a plumber at the University of Washington on main campus, and I'm also the president of Local 1488, which represents workers at the UW and the UW-MC. We represent custodians, trades, food service workers, and a lot of other hospital workers, librarians, truck drivers. I first started paying attention to Kshama when she was still a professor, or maybe it was just a adjunct professor, I'm not quite sure, at Central Seattle. And she started talking about the Occupy movement and the 99%. And I basically got involved with her because of her fight for 15 Now. At the time, most of my members, they started off the minimum starting salary was $9.75 to $11 an hour. So this would have been a huge increase if we could have gotten it. Once 15 Now passed at the City of Seattle Council, we started asking the university about when they were going to up the minimum wage to 15 because they were a business in the City of Seattle. Well, all of a sudden, the university decided that they said they were a state agency. Well, it's true they are a state agency, but they do have their business in the City of Seattle. So we started doing a campaign with our members, different student groups, who a lot of who were food service workers, and we worked with Kshama to put a lot of pressure on the university. We had rallies, petitions, and she was instrumental in forcing the university to agree to $15 an hour. That was like a huge victory for our members to go from $9.75 to $15 an hour. And, this to our members, Kshama, they all love Kshama. A majority of our members are women, people of color, or immigrants. And to them, she represents the fight that they would like to do. And they just, really appreciate all the support that she's given us. The $15 an hour minimum wage, why it was a big boost, as anyone who lives in Seattle knows, it barely comes, the cost of living here is so high that a lot of our members have to live outside of Seattle. So we've continued to fight for the 15 an hour for other people. It was a big economic victory, and we couldn't have done it without her support. So, we jumped in, our local jumped in with money and members helping to fight for the 15 hour. And once again, we just really appreciate the work that she's done. It's taken off across the country. It's amazing. that starting here in Seattle, and it just spread all over the country. And in fact, the state government here, their minimum wage was even worse. They so far have upped it a couple of bucks, but we're still working on them to try to get them to raise it up to 15 an hour, because we have state workers all across Washington, especially in Eastern Washington, and they would really like to see $15 an hour now too. So thank you.
Oh, sure thing, Paula. Thank you so much. I have some names to read off here. John K, 27 bucks. Thank you so much. Richard L's, $27. Caprice P, $5 donation. Craig M, $54. Marlena O, $27. K-E, K-A-I, first name, $100. I hope I didn't butcher your name after you donated $100. K or Kai. Oh, man. Another $100 donation with a tough name to pronounce. Cielito P, $100. Like I said, hope I got your names right. Thank you so much for those donations. Can we get some $15 donations, or sorry, I'm sort of selling a short. Let's have some donations that are multiples of $15. How many hours of utopian labor can you guys donate? Can you do 30, 45, 60, 75, 90? What about 120? Full 8-hour workday, 120 bucks. ShamaSolidarity.org/telethon. Thank you so much to everybody who has donated. Let's try and keep those coming. I'm going to go to Jonathan Rosenblum next. You are the author of Beyond $15, about the fight for 15 in nearby SeaTac, which you actually helped lead, and which happened in parallel with Kshama's campaign in 2013. Can you talk about how those each of those campaigns sort of reinforced the other?
Yeah, thanks, Keaton, and it's really great to be part of this telethon for the Kshama Solidarity campaign. The campaigns actually worked really in synergy with one another, but to fully appreciate it, I think you have to go back one step to the New York City fast food workers, who in the fall of 2012 first raised the banner when they went on strike for a day, demanding 15 and a union. And I remember sitting in the Teamsters Union Hall at an organizing committee of the SeaTac airport workers shortly after that, and we were watching a video of the New York workers going on strike. And what the SeaTac airport workers said is, that's what we want to do, right? At the time, airport workers in SeaTac were making $9 and change an hour. And they said, we need something big. We don't want just incremental change. We need to make a big step forward. Now, the SeaTac campaign was about building power. It wasn't just about winning an increased wage. It was a union organizing campaign. And what the workers in SeaTac did in 2013 is they demanded union recognition from the airlines and the bosses that employed them in these low-wage jobs. And when the bosses refused to recognize the union and sit down and bargain, then the workers went to the ballot and said, fine, we will impose a $15 wage on you. Not just that, but full-time work and other protections that you'd see in a typical union contract. That was all part of the SeaTac Fight for 15 initiative. In fact, our enemies at the Seattle Times editorial board called it a virtual union contract, and that's really what it was. Now, at the same time, Kshama and Socialist Alternative were campaigning 15 miles north up in Seattle, and it was really wonderful to just see sort of the synergy between the publicity that the airport workers were getting with their struggle and the kind of support that we got from Seattle, from Kshama's campaign, but also the support that it gave back to the campaign up in Seattle. Now, one other thing is worth noting is that after Kshama won, Socialist Alternative took the same approach in many ways as the SeaTac workers did. They understood we have a choice here. We can run this as a pure sort of a policy campaign and lobby city council and try to get the Democrats to agree to 15, or we can understand this fight is really about power, and we have to leverage our power to force and to demand that the political establishment agree to $15 an hour. As Kshama mentioned just a few minutes ago, yes, there was a demand for legislation for 15, but what really put the movement over the top was this community grassroots effort that said, if the city council in Seattle doesn't give us 15, we are going to take this issue right to the ballot and we're going to force the city to adopt 15. And that is really what scared the political establishment into giving us the $15 legislative victory. So in that sense, both the CTAC victory of the workers at the airport and also the fight for 15 in Seattle followed parallel tracks where we understood fundamentally this is about power. It's not about persuading people to adopt good policy. It's about working class power that has to start at the grassroots.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I've always sort of felt that way, and I think one of the real themes in all of your answers so far just has to do with a certain theory of politics that has sort of been I would say brainwashed out of the general public. I mean, I think people think of politics as this sort of intellectual exercise, as a sort of battle of wits, when what I'm hearing from all you guys is that it's really a battle of strengths. Kshama said in one of the interviews that I saw her on how we need just an open conflict, right? Open class struggle between labor and management, labor and capital. Excuse me. Pardon me. Jensen, I'm going to go to you from 15 Now, Minnesota. You were part of the fight for 15 in both Seattle and Minneapolis. You're part of 15 Now. Minneapolis became, as I understand, the first major Midwestern city to pass $15 an hour minimum wage in 2017. So as someone who has experience in both of those fights, can you talk about some of the similarities and differences in those two struggles?
Yeah, absolutely. Really excited to be here, and I'm really excited actually to follow Paula and Jonathan and their comments, because it really was important to see the precedent that was set in Seattle and have that be what, contributed to working people all across the country having more confidence to say we can actually win 15. And I think that that really contributed to being able to launch the campaign in Minneapolis. And so I would highlight maybe two concrete similarities, one being it's a point that's been made throughout the night in different forms, but don't underestimate the establishment. We have to actually build in the streets to be able to leverage our power, to be able to get anything done, really. So much of the time when we're fighting for something progressive like 15 or an Amazon tax or Medicare for all, they'll set up these committees or something like this where we can bring all stakeholders to the table, some kind of, proposal like this that really so much of the time is actually about just bringing business interests in to intimidate working class people. So we're kind of put on these committees and meant to just sort of, have this be a consensus-based approach that brings all these stakeholders together, but really it's about watering down what the movement in the streets has been demanding. And so, I think what's so powerful about the examples that Jonathan gave and how a lot of those struggles in the streets were actually kind of supporting each other, and the fact that Kshama's first campaign was happening at the same time as 15 and CTAC. The point is, I think the other similarity that we saw in Minneapolis and Seattle was how crucial organizing is and having working class people in the driver's seat of making decisions about the movement strategy and how to actually move forward. And the threat of a ballot initiative in Seattle, in CTAC, and actually in Minneapolis as well was super critical. And I think that says a lot about how much the establishment doesn't want working class people to be in the driver's seat, to be in control of making the decision about how to actually win things like 15. They want to be able to be in control of the process so that they can, include loopholes, include various ways that, things negotiated in the back rooms of city halls in major cities across the US. But, as someone mentioned earlier, that's the role that Kshama has been playing. It's not about just getting a seat at the table, but it's about recreating that table entirely and actually fighting for working class people and being a megaphone for these movements. And I would say one of the major differences in Minneapolis was, okay, so we had, council members all over the place, or, politicians everywhere on the momentum of our movements were suddenly saying 15 was great. Okay, cool. But, in definition, it's the devil's in the details, right? How much are they going to try and carve it out? And what we didn't have here was a Kshama in City Hall. We need to have people like Kshama, representatives from our movements, Marxists, socialist activists in city halls all across the country. So not fewer shamas like the recall campaign wants, but more shamas in elected positions. And, you know, not having that in Minneapolis, we were able to overcome the obstacles in front of our movement and ultimately, you know, put political pressure on the city council to force a $15 minimum wage. But it would have been far better to have someone who was an organizer in City Hall like Kshama has been for movements in Seattle. And I think that, like, you know, it's a real testament to the span of topics we've covered tonight too, and how we've talked about organizing on all of these just different fronts, on internationalism, on, you know, movements like 15, on forcing big business to accept our victories when they haven't wanted to. And I think that really is a testament and shows how terrifying the position in Seattle has been for the political establishment, for the ruling class there, and how much they don't want to set a precedent of letting this happen anywhere else in the country, and why it's so important, I think, to fight this recall campaign with everything that we have: socialists, working class activists across the country, rank and file union members, all of that, donating and building the campaign, keeping Kshama in that seat, because again, like, I think we need to have more representatives like this everywhere, not fewer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you so much to all of the co-hosts. It's a really is a great honor to have been involved in this. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of everybody, of everybody here. So thank you guys so much. I'll toss it back to Matt. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Keaton, and thank you to all the panelists. I want to make an appeal to people, and Keaton made this appeal. All the hosts have made this appeal, but we are up against some of the biggest forces, the most powerful forces in the country, not only the country, but the world here in Seattle, who are trying to remove Kshama from office. I want to make an appeal, number one, to people who have not yet donated. You know, we just talked about the $15 minimum wage. If you can give $15, you know, you can be a part of this movement to defend Kshama, to defend the only socialist in City Hall in Seattle against this attack. Think if you can give $15, but any amount. If you can give even $1, if you can give $5, we have over 8,000 individual contributions that have been made to this campaign. If you haven't donated yet, think about what you can give, and go to shamasolidarity.org/telethon and make that donation right now. If you've already donated to the campaign, think right now, can you give another $5? Can you give another $15? Can you give another $50 to the campaign? Think if you can make another donation. Go to that same website, shamasolidarity.org/telethon, and make that donation. You know, we need a movement. We're working class people. This is the only way that we can win. What we need is with the power of that movement. So I'm going to go to the last panel while people are going on and hopefully making those donations. We have Liza Featherstone, who is a professor, author, journalist, has written for The Nation, for Jacobin Magazine, writes about labor struggles and the labor movement, an incredibly important topic that is absolutely critical to building a different kind of society, and you know, challenging these powerful interests. And they're going to be talking about the role of that labor movement in doing that. I'll give it to you, Liza.
Thanks. Well, it is really an honor to be part of this. And I just want to give a few shout outs to some of the people who have just contributed. Dana J with 15, with that symbolism of $15 an hour. Mike V with 27, with that that connection to the Bernie movement. Tony M with a big 120. Thank you all, each and every one of you, so much. This is like, it's great to see people participating in this. So we're, you know, because we're coming at the end of the evening, I know some of you watching out there might be getting a little tired, especially on the East Coast or abroad. We're going to be as concise as possible, and in this last segment, and we're going to talk a bit about the significance of Kshama's tenure in office and the work that she's been doing for the socialist movement and our efforts to build socialism in the United States, which is a project long overdue, and to rebuild the labor movement, also equally important. So I've got with me in this last segment Kshama, who needs no introduction, literally, in this context, and I wonder, Kshama, can you say a little bit about socialist alternative and its role in your city council office.
Thank you so much, Liza, and also thank you for the article that you wrote in Jacobin defending our solidarity campaign and explaining why we need nationwide solidarity on the left to defeat this recall. And as I was mentioning earlier, socialist alternative really has been absolutely integral to every, not only every election that we have won, but also all the victories that so many of our activists and community members have been talking about today. And I think it really provides a fundamentally different way of organizing for working people. And it also ties in very closely with the question that stares us in the face on the left, which is the need to build for the working class to have our own political organization, because regardless of the differences between the Democrats and Republicans, and of course there are differences, ultimately the thing that they agree on is that they serve their Wall Street masters. And so for the working class to really have its own representation that is connected with social movements, with the labor movement in the way that our office has been, is a completely different sort of type of politics. And it doesn't come out of any one individual's brilliance or courage, although that is absolutely necessary, that our elected leaders and also unelected leaders in movements have courage to stand up to the establishment and continue to represent the interests of ordinary people, regardless of the kind of onslaught of opposition that they personally come under. But ultimately, it cannot be about individuals. It has to be about building a real organizational power for ordinary people. And Socialist Alternative is a small but very, very crucial example of how that can be done, because from day one, as I was saying before, these campaigns have been a product of democratic discussion and debate inside Socialist Alternative. And also what's absolutely crucial is that Socialist Alternative itself is rooted in the working class as a whole. I mean, most of our members, for example, are renters or struggling to get by and know firsthand what life is like for the vast majority of Americans under capitalism, and are extremely motivated to fight against the status quo, but also are further enriched by a very serious approach that we take in Socialist Alternative to a study on history and politics. And we harness all of that understanding to guide us in building movements and coming up with the kind of strategy and tactics that we have all described before. And Socialist Alternative as a whole is also very much working alongside other organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America, like labor unions, like Paula's labor union, and many activists like Jonathan and Sujata and Raghav. You know, we're rooted in this overall struggle, and that's what makes our council office so dramatically different than the idea of having a well-meaning progressive Democrat, because at the end of the day, they end up having to be subservient to the agenda of the democratic establishment. And just one last thing I'll add is that the way we have organized our office and how it stands as a contrast even to some of the approaches taken by the squad Congress members, where they weren't willing to really call out Pelosi and the Schumer-dominated Democratic establishment to win $15 an hour as part of the stimulus program. I think all of those examples also show that it is extremely progressive that we've had so many self-avowed socialists elected around the nation. But we also have to remember alongside that it's not simply an accumulation of seats of people who call themselves socialists. It's really a question of having elected offices that are tied to movements in the way that ours is.
So much, so important. Thank you, Kshama. Let's bring in, with that in mind, some of the Socialist Alternative labor activists. I want to bring in now Cora Bergantiños. Sorry to mispronounce your name, undoubtedly. So you're president of the Columbia Postdoc Workers, UAW. I'm a UAW member myself. Nice to see you here. So you're a socialist as well. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about why the growing socialist movement is important to your work as a unionist. I know you are here in a personal capacity, not representing your union, but just if you could speak to that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that yeah, it's like we are in labor. I think like we're in a really exciting moment in a certain way. Like I think like we are seeing like workers from very different backgrounds and professions like understanding the need to get organized collectively. And yeah, like now in the United States, I think it's 65% of people see unions favorably. And also in many other countries across the world, this is also happening. And I think this is a historic opportunity and it's really exciting. But I think that at the same time, we need to acknowledge that the labor movement, it's really like in a back footing. It's been a decline for decades. And in some ways, like we've been receiving attacks from all sides. Like we have, of course, employers with law firms more and more sophisticated to really kill unions, but then also politicians like actively or passively align themselves to these corporate interests, like like either by passing or not really fighting against laws that really have curtail our ability to organize as labor. And in addition, we've also seen, and I'm sure that as a UAW member, you can understand where I'm coming from, like a real bureaucratization of some of the top leaders of unions, right? Like really disconnected from members and really closer to this corporate interest and these corporate politicians than really to the membership. Like example, the ex-president of UAW, Gary Jones. And I think like this has meant that we have lost many of the tools and strategies that made the labor movement so powerful for workers. And I think like that's where being a socialist is so important, right? Like I think that we can analyze like the consequences of that. And I think like one of the things is like we have come like this, we have right now like this sort side view of our union locals as really focused in the workplace with our small interest and not really recognizing that independently of being ACME, SCAU, UAW, UFT, we all have collective interests. I think like that can be seen in the approach of fighting for the PRO Act. Like there is no collective strategy from labor. And this has really caused a decrease of power in the labor movement collectively and has led to this kind of idea of, the policy of compromises, that instead of really fighting and organizing our power and only compromise when we have won what we want, like really an offensive struggle, like what Kshama, and it has been discussed in other panels with 15, like really starting from the compromise. And this is happening in labor leaders and it's happening in politicians, like really starting from what can I give up in order to get this other thing in. And this has put us in a losing battle in labor, particularly for a long time. And I think that we really need to break up this. And being a socialist, I think it's extremely important to really see how we can break this framework. And again, I think like we are in a really exciting moment right now. We are seeing openings, like December, for instance, we are seeing how it's been discussed, what went right, what went wrong. We are seeing new forms of organizing, like the minority union of the Google workers, the Alphabet workers. We are seeing, again, in UAW, a discussion and maybe a change nationally on the organization with this one member, one vote referendum that we have on the fall. And again, like I think like Kshama and her office has really shown also how politics can really interact with labor. Like when I was, some of my members wanted to push this whole question of the TRIPS waiver vaccine for countries like India to produce COVID. And when I called my colleagues in UAW 4121 in the University of Washington, they had already, gone with Kshama and her council appeal for the TRIPS waiver. So really this kind of interaction has all to be revived. I think like we really need to rethink this labor. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Cora. That's such an important reminder to all of us, and just really really helps to focus us. I'm going to just give I'm going to bring in Elon Axelbank, who's been organizing in Bessemer for over the recent Amazon fight, and also a member of Socialist Alternative. First of all, a couple shout outs. Thank you to Marcus S. for a very generous $230, and April S. for 100. Tyler W. with the great solidarity of 27, and Ellen T. with the also great solidarity of 15. Love all, each and every one of these donations, and to people who are contributing, just thank you so much. No matter what dollar amount, the dollar amount is a huge is a huge deal to different people depending on how we're situated. So so like $20 is going to be a lot to some people, and 200 is nothing to some people. And just thank you every single person who has donated to our campaign. So Elon, can you tell us a little bit about your experience organizing in Bessemer, and what it meant to how Kshama's efforts fighting Amazon in Seattle connected to your efforts in Alabama?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Liza. I'm really excited to be here supporting the Kshama Solidarity campaign. I recently got back from Alabama. I was in Birmingham and Bessemer for around 2 months, and it was a real honor to take part in the first major fight to unionize a big Amazon warehouse. It was a majority Black workforce taking on, majority Black workforce in a right-to-work state in the Deep South, taking on literally the richest man in the world. And of course, the results didn't go the way that we wanted, but the results don't change, the fight that happened. And Amazon is extremely scared now between what's going on in Seattle, and of course, part of why, this recall campaign is happening. But they're scared in the wake of this Amazon union drive down in Alabama, because the world now knows, the fight that these workers waged in Alabama shed light on conditions of Amazon workers, not just in the US, but across the world. That Jeff Bezos in last year during the pandemic made $80 billion across the year per hour. This is $40 million per hour, $11,000 literally every second. Meanwhile, Amazon workers, in Alabama, their starting wage is $15 an hour. They work 10, 12-hour shifts with just 30-minute breaks. But the warehouse is so big that it takes 10 minutes to walk to the break room. You sit for 10 minutes, and then you walk 10 minutes back. And I think in the wake of the Amazon union drive, the biggest mistake, the worst thing that we in the labor movement and the socialist movement could do is draw the conclusion that Amazon is too big to be defeated, that Amazon can't be taken on. And I think, when we were in Alabama, we talked so much about Kshama, and some, people had already heard about Kshama. They'd already heard about Tax Amazon, Amazon workers, people involved with the union drive, community supporters, et cetera. And actually some Black Lives Matter activists are talking about doing a Tax Amazon Alabama initiative now. And Kshama shows that Amazon is not too big to be beat. Kshama and the movement in Seattle shows that we can beat Amazon, not once, but many times. And I think there's lessons from what Kshama and Socialist Alternative and the Tax Amazon movement has done in Seattle, because as it was talked about earlier, a tax on Amazon was won in 2018. And then 3 weeks later, the Democrats repealed, the Tax Amazon with the backing of Amazon, with the behind-the-scenes collusion of the Democratic establishment and Amazon. And I think, so what did Kshama and Socialist Alternative and Tax Amazon movement do? They turned around, they built an even bigger, stronger, harder movement, and they won an even bigger Amazon tax 2 years later. And I think we can draw lessons from that for the PRO Act, for the next steps for the labor movement around the PRO Act, that if we can't trust the Democrats to do our fighting for us, that if the Democrats try and sabotage our movement, try and undermine our ability to pass the PRO Act, then what does that mean? We just have to build an even bigger and stronger movement. National days of actions by unions, union members occupying senators' offices, to get them to support the PRO Act and all of this. So I think, the ties between Kshama's work in Seattle and the fight to unionize Amazon in Alabama and elsewhere are so intimately tied. And that's why one of the many reasons why I'm excited to support the Solidarity Campaign.
Absolutely, showing us that that Amazon can be beaten. What could be more important work? And thank you, Elon, also for the work you're doing in Alabama. So important. I want to bring in Byron Sigcho-Lopez, Chicago Alderman and DSA member. One of the things that is so important about Kshama's work that I think doesn't get necessarily enough attention is 7 years ago she was the only socialist city council person, and now our movement has a lot more in Chicago and New York, and some other, well, actually not in New York yet. We're electing some. We have some state senators and assembly people, but in Chicago, you've got some socialist city council people, and so I wonder, Byron, can you speak to the relevance of Kshama's work for your own work as an alderman in Chicago?
Yes, well, thank you. And certainly, Kshama's work has been extremely important in informing the work here in Chicago. A lot of the fights to push for 15 and a union, the tenant rights bills, of course, the Amazon tax, taxing the rich, the police brutality fight that we are dealing with, among many others. Certainly, this has been very informative for the movement here in Chicago. What I will say is that the need for socialist electeds, it is dire. I'm not sure, I'm trying to stay away from the use of progressive because I don't even know what that even means anymore. Mayor Lightfoot considers herself a progressive. I'm not sure I see any progressiveness in that kind of approach to government. But this notion, I would like to mention a few things. That this notion of electeds, and I know Kshama gets attacked constantly by progressives or corporate Democrats, not sure what the right wording is for some of these electeds, but it is with the notion that they need people who can work with one another, the relationships or whatnot. These kind of private clubs that serve the special interest groups, and they're really directly to take away the voice of our communities, to put, instead of elected officials like Kshama, who represent the best interests of the public, the best interests of working people, to put rubber stamp elected officials who simply represent the best interests of corporations like Amazon, billionaires, and the status quo that continues to fail our communities. Kshama has been a leader and a national leader that has pushed for many important fights, national fights like the Amazon tax, the tenant rights movement, most recently vaccination for all, and making sure that the patent does not take away from international solidarity, just to name a few. That is what is so important for us to talk about the relevance of this attack and the use of the judicial system to persecute, to impose corporate agendas, and ultimately to take away the voice and the democratic process of working people. That's what this is so critical. And this is not the only case, but this is the most outrageous case, in my opinion, of the use of the judicial system to basically persecute Kshama to benefit Amazon and the many other corporate interests that Kshama has been effectively battling in the Seattle City Council. The other cases, I think that this is a trend that put at risk the democratic process and can pave the way for fascism. And I want to make sure that we emphasize that important point. The use of courts by Chevron that recently is trying to use the court to persecute and indict Stephen Dossiger in New York. We had most recently polluters like the General Iron here in Chicago trying to push for a permit, an illegal permit that now, fortunately, the EPA has halted, and many others. So I want to just emphasize the importance of this fight to make sure that we stop fascism. I think that the Democratic Party has to bear the responsibility of the rise of fascism and the Trumpism that affected us for years. And it is critical today more than ever that we protect electeds like Kshama, because by protecting and defending Kshama, we continue to defend our democratic process that is electing socialist elected officials that are effective in office. I think that what we see, sorry.
And I think that is the perfect place for us to start winding down, because that is the perfect point for people to think about as they think about what you are going to do to support the fight against Kshama's recall. Just with that in mind, just a few shout outs to people who have already begun answering that question for themselves. Kyle V has given $5, Daniel G 27, EG $5, Justin Y 27, Craig J 15, and Sally S a great big 250. Thank you people so much. Kshama, do you want to conclude with just very briefly, your experience shows for all of us the lengths to which the ruling class will go to stop socialists whenever our work is successful, as yours has been. What have you learned? What have you and Socialist Alternative learned about how to fight back? Because that's inevitable, right? If we are at all successful, they will try to stop us. And you're right in the middle of it. What have you learned?
Thank you so much for asking that, Liza. But before responding, I just wanted to thank everybody who donated and during this telethon, all the hosts and Lauren who helped organize this, and all the members of Socialist Alternative who also helped put this together. And also special thanks to Byron Lopez and Konstantine Anthony, both city council members, one in Chicago, one in Burbank, who are clearly demonstrating in real life the kind of solidarity we need among socialists within the socialist movement, on the left against this recall campaign. And what, as you said, you put the nail on the head, correctly, Liza, when you said that when working people get organized, let alone win some victories out of getting organized, out of fighting back, then we should expect the wrath of the ruling class to come down upon us, because they're not going to accept us winning victories and then using that as momentum to build for further victories and so on. So when you see the ruling class, when you see billionaires pushing back against what we would consider small steps forward, like $15 an hour, and very necessary humane steps like making vaccine access available to billions of people, what they're doing is not only putting their profits today in front of people's lives, but what they're also doing is showing that they understand that if they allow working people to win a victory today, then it will only provide impetus for working people to win more tomorrow. And I think that's exactly the lesson we have learned in Socialist Alternative, and that we all, as working people, as members of the labor movement, as socialists, have to take on board, which is that because the interests of the capitalist class, of the elite, are diametrically opposed to the interests of working people, we should expect that will happen, and also understand that every time we fight and we win, it is hard. It's going to take a lot from us, but it also should remind us of what's at stake. So what's at stake today in defeating this recall is not only defending the victories that we have already won in Seattle, but it is defending the idea that it is possible for working class people to get organized and fight back and win. And that's why we have to connect our defending of our council seat here, defense of the socialist movement, to the point, the idea of going on the offensive and winning rent control, winning Medicare for all, winning the canceling of student debt, canceling of COVID debt for renters, winning a federal $15 minimum wage, and really setting about on the path towards a completely different system than capitalism, which is clearly not working for the vast majority of people.
Well, thank you. That's, I think that is where we should wrap up, right? I mean, that's like what could be a more important point to end our evening with.
Yeah, thank you, Liza, and thank you to that panel for closing us out there with that great discussion. Before we all go, I want to give an update on how much we've raised today, because of course we're not here. I mean, these political points and these political discussions are incredibly important for learning and absorbing these lessons as a movement and taking our movement forward. But we're also here to defend Kshama against this right-wing attack. We have now raised over $3,800 from this telethon today to go towards the Kshama Solidarity Campaign, to go towards that defense of Kshama. I want to see, before the day is over, before the night is over, I want to see that go above $4,000. We have $190 left to put that above that $4,000 mark. If you can make another donation, go to kshamasolidarity.org/telethon, make that donation, help us get over that $4,000 mark so we can send a powerful message from this event of what working people are able to chip in and sacrifice to defend our gains. We heard from 3 city councilors, Kshama, Byron Sigcho-Lopez, and Konstantine Anthony, who have done amazing work of collaborating on vaccine internationalism, collaborating on the tax Amazon movement across the country. And that's what this represents. This isn't just about Kshama. This is about what Kshama represents, what she represents for our movement. The additive effects that these city councilors, these representatives of ours that we have can have when they connect these movements together and fight for what we need. We heard from international speakers Susan Fitzgerald and others. This is an international movement that we are building, and we have to defend this seat. We have to defend this seat in Seattle because we as a working class have to defend every gain that we make because we are constantly under attack. So go to that donation link. Donate another $5, $15, $50. Help us get over that $4,000 mark. And thank you everyone for attending. For those of you who are in Seattle, your donations, we need those. If you're in Seattle watching today, we are having a door knocking summer launch next Sunday, May 23rd at 6 p.m. We are going to be door knocking. Look for that information on Facebook. I hope people can drop that Facebook link into the YouTube chat somewhere. Come out to that door knocking launch with us to go and talk to the community about this. We need those conversations. We need volunteers on the ground doing this work. So thank you again to everyone who came out to this telethon. It's been some really amazing discussions, and I will see you all in the struggle. Thank you.